Well, this is Adam Rapp. I assume you get applause, yes? Hey, okay. One thing I want to start out with is I tell my writing students here that, my screenwriting students, I say that, you should not think of yourselves as screenwriters. You should think of yourselves as writers who are currently working on learning how to write in movie form. But that doesn't mean you can't also be a novelist. You can't also write plays, poems, short stories. And there's a couple reasons. One is I think in the industry, screenwriting is almost like, oh, he's just the screenwriter. So it's a kind of, I think, a self-esteem issue, but also I think it's a way of thinking, there's other things out there to do. You're a writer, you're not just a screenwriter, and it's great to have what I consider to be the living embodiment of that ethos sitting like 2 feet away from me. To start, you're from Joliet originally.
Yeah, I was born on, I think, 3200 North Hoyne here in the city, and then my parents split up when I was about 5, and my mother took my brother and my sister and I to Joliet, where she had a nursing job. So I was raised from 5 to high school age in Joliet, which is my hometown, and it's always great coming back here. I was, watching the Cubs play a few hours before now,
Yeah, and you said they won.
They did. They
Yes,
won.
sir.
So they had a rough 8th inning, but they gave up 2 runs, but they still won. So
There's always a rough inning.
yeah, but yeah, I'm this is my hometown, and it's always great to come back. And I've been in New York for 21 years, and it's a lot. I can't believe that, And whenever I come back here, it just feels like no time has passed. It's strange.
I've done a little background, research on you, checking you out. As far as I read that you were a jock in high school, but you didn't hang out with the jocks. You consider yourself kind of a nerd, but a nerd who liked to play sports. And the question I have is, always start at the beginning. I always say, and it's like, why writing? Do you remember the moment where you thought, hey, I want to do this?
Yeah, it's actually completely directly related to my jockhood. I was in college in Dubuque, Iowa. I went to Clark College, which is now known as Clark University. I went for the first 2 years. I went to Loras College, which is also in Dubuque, and I was on the basketball team. And I was a pre-med major. I thought being a doctor would be heroic, and so I thought that would be a great thing to do. And I got to organic chem, which I think is the litmus test for anyone who's thinking about actually pursuing a pre-med degree. And I couldn't see it in my head. I couldn't see the stuff. And I think I've always been a very visual person in that way. And so when I got to organic chem and I got to like physics 2, I just realized it just wasn't going to be for me. And I had to drop those 2 classes. And to stay on the basketball team, you had to carry 12 credits. And so I was on my way to the registrar's office to actually find out what other classes I could take. And on my way there, a Displaced poetry class, there was some construction on campus, and this Displaced poetry class run by a guy named Bill Pauley was right next to the registrar's office in this weird little room that was just a makeshift classroom. And I just popped my head in. I heard the sitar music, literally like Ravi Shankar, I think. And it was like, and then I looked in, and Bill Pauley was this ex-hippie, well, he was a hippie, and he was surrounded by maybe 12 students, and they had a yellow legal pad out, and they were writing to the music, and I just popped my head in, and he went, "Come in." I swear, and I came in, I sat down, and he said they were doing an automatic writing exercise, which we were just talking about actually, and in the green room, and he said, just make sure your pencil doesn't stop moving. You can scribble, you can draw, you can just let your thoughts flow and unlock your unconscious. And so I did, and it was the first time I'd ever experienced connecting my thought to my hand to composing, the written word in any way. I mean, I'd taken English classes obviously in high school, and I started to enjoy some reading, but that was the first time I actually like sat down and wrote something for no reason beyond academics. And I had this incredible epiphany in that moment, and I finished the class, and we were asked to read what we wrote, and I wrote this crazy, I don't even remember what it was about, but it was probably some unfathomably bad prose, but it was, it had a lot of kinetic energy in it, and so he was like, you have something, you should come to class, take this class. And so I went to the registrar's office and I picked up that class in a fiction writing class, and immediately changed my life. And I started reading voraciously. And my little brother, who is an actor, when he was very, very young, he's 3 years younger than me. When he was very young, he was reading incredibly complicated novels. He was reading like Don DeLillo novels and John Updike novels, complicated for like a 14-year-old. I mean, my little brother had an incredibly high IQ, and he was in gifted programs. When he was in 8th grade, he was supposed to be in the 6th grade. And I told him I was talking to him on the phone, and I said, I discovered this thing. I like writing. And he was like, well, you should read these books. And he gave me my little brother gave me like a syllabus, like a reading list. And so I started reading Salinger and Edith Wharton, and I read Rabbit Run, and I read Slaughterhouse-Five, and I read White Noise by DeLillo, and I just became I just wanted to do that. I wanted to make work that was writing. I wanted to write, and so first it was purely fiction writing and poetry, but not seriously. I wasn't heading into a poetry direction, but I was inspired by the poetry that I was learning and by that teacher, Bill Pauly. And then I just started writing that summer like every day, and that's just how it started. It was really an accident, kind of, because I was trying to stay on the basketball team,
And you were a novelist before anything else, I mean, as far as getting published. And how long from the time you took the class to you finally were published?
I started, well, that was I was 20. No, that was my sophomore year, so I was 19, second semester of my sophomore year. And then I started writing my first novel. I went to college 5 years because my right eye was punctured. It's fine, I can see. But I have a permanently dilated pupil, and I had to sit a year out, and I got redshirted, and that's when you sit out a year in collegiate sports, and then they give you an extra year to play. So I went 5 years, and during my 5th year, when I was at Clark, I had so many credits from going 5 years that I was able to take my course load down to like 2 classes, and so I did 2 classes, and then I just started writing a novel, and that was May of 1990, and I finished it. After I moved to New York that summer. I finished it in like late July. I was writing every day and like obsessed with it, and I got maybe a 250-page manuscript together, and then I was working. I got a job in book publishing at or at Penguin Books, and this woman came up to me one day and asked me if I wanted to go get a drink with her, and I said yeah, and we played pool, and then it turned out she was an editor, and she said, I heard you're writing a novel, which I couldn't believe anyone knew I was writing a novel, but it was back in the days when, in the early 90s, when it was Windows and function keys instead of,
Oh, yeah, that's when I first started using
it was like F5 function key, and on my job, I could hit a function key and split screen so that my boss wouldn't know I was writing a novel. So I was writing this novel, and then he would come in, and then I would split screen, and I'd be writing the call reports, for the sales force, And so I basically finished the book half time at home and half time at work. And so she knew I don't know how she knew, but she knew, and so she asked me what it was about, and I told her, and it turned out she was a young adult editor, and it was about a kid who gets sent to a military school. It was a kind of a coming of age, novel. And she read it, and about a week later, she called me to her office, and she said, I love your book, and then she said, if you can get Holden Caulfield's voice out of it, I'll publish it. and I was like, Holden Caulfield's voice is in the novel. I mean, I was obsessed with Salinger and Holden Caulfield, and I didn't even, it was so in me that I didn't even know I was, mocking or aping him so much. And so I did a pass where I kind of cleaned up the voice and, made it more, maybe a little more homogenized, actually. And then I turned it back into her, and then she said, now she liked it, and she was like, now I have to give it to another editor because we published by committee, and she did, and it got published. And she called me down, and she was like, we're going to publish it. And I remember I walked out of her office, and I was working on the 4th floor, and she worked on the 3rd floor. And I took the elevator downstairs, and it's in the Saatchi and Saatchi building, Penguin Books is, which is on the west side of, in the West Village. It's a big building, and it takes up a whole block. And I remember I just took the elevator down. I was supposed to be up working, you know, and I took the elevator down to the 1st floor, and I just like ran as fast as I could around the building. And I was like, I can't, you know, I don't even know why I was running. But I was so excited, you know, just to be published, you know, and I was 23. I just turned 23. So it came out in '94. It took about 2 years for it to actually become a book, because that's just the nature of the beast. And that's what I did. I was writing fiction.
Were you, well, it was a young adult book? Mm-hmm. Were you intentionally writing a young adult book? Because you're just writing a book and she said it's young adult.
No, it's so funny. I think 9 of my novels are like young adult novels, and I don't think any of them are young adult novels. But that's just the market that I like to write about teenagers. I like to write about that time in our lives, and you know, everything's so uncertain, and all the pressures and all the decision making and all the sex and, you know, heartbreak and, you know, SATs and all the pressures, I think make for great drama and great literature, and choices that kids have to make. So I think it's a very compelling time. But yeah, I think the book I'm writing now is not young adult, and then one I published in '97 or '07, '06, The Year of Endless Sorrows, is not young adult. But all the other ones are considered like young adult books. But I'd probably get in trouble right now in front of, if my publisher was here. But I always say like, I don't think they're actually for kids. Yeah.
When you made the transition to playwriting, mm-hmm. How did that come about?
Well, my little brother, the same little brother who was the great reader as a kid, became a pretty well-known actor in New York in the theater world. And at the time, he was in John Guare's 6 Degrees of Separation. When I first moved to New York, I had no social life. So I was working at Penguin Books. I'd get off at 6. I'd often go play ball for a few hours, because that just was what I did, and I was always playing ball as much as I could still. And then invariably, I'd go meet my brother at Lincoln Center after his show, and I really liked the people. You know, it was a lot of misfits get involved in the theater, and I certainly felt like a misfit. And I liked the play a lot. It was the first time I'd seen a play in New York that was like not a musical, that was dark and compelling, and dealt with like really interesting themes and had really incredible characters. I think John Guare is a total genius. I always have. And so I was really inspired by that, and I was inspired by the social event of an audience coming to witness something and seeing something actually happening in front of them. I just thought the energy of that was very exciting, and I thought, wow, I want to try that. So, and I also thought like hanging out with those people was really cool, and it gave me a social place to be with people I thought were interesting. You know, storytellers. You know, actors are storytellers, writers, directors. And so I thought I'll try to write a play, and if I wrote a good enough play, I could maybe have some people to hang out with. And so I got all the plays with the stickers on them, you know, with the award, you know, Pulitzer Prize winners or whatever. I tried to collect, I would ask actors, my brother's friends, or, you know, who's the writer I should read, or, so I was reading like Sam Shepard and John Guare and Irene Fornés and Carol Churchill and a lot of those, and Pinter, and I was really inspired by that, and so then I started to try to do that. I had never took a class. I would just go see theater. I would go to as much free theater as I could, because my brother was getting free tickets from other people, and that's how I kind of got involved. And I wrote a play in 1994 called Ghosts in the Cottonwoods that got into the O'Neill National Playwrights Conference, and that was my first kind of experience where the playwright was the center of the experience. And it was a 5-day. You were in Waterford, Connecticut, which is near New London, and kind of with 10 or 11 other playwrights, like communing with theater for like an entire month. And then they did an intensive 6-day workshop on your piece, and actors carried scripts, and there was modular sets, and there was like a very low-end lighting design, and just a very modular experience. But it was like one of the most thrilling things I've ever experienced, and so I knew based on that I wanted to do it again. And so while I was there, I started writing another play because I was like, I want to come back to the O'Neill, and I wrote the second play that actually did get into the O'Neill, a play called Treblinka, and then I won an award for that play. I think for the theater, and anyway, I don't know how many people here are involved in theater, but for the theater and for playwriting especially, like there's so much inherent failure and there's so much rejection that all the little things where you're actually encouraged to do it are like these incredible vitamins, of these little things they give you, like whether it's an award or even a director saying, I really like this play, or someone you respect coming and sharing some time and watching it and talking to you about it. I think it's really important for young writers to experience that kind of encouragement. And for me, that's what the O'Neill was for me those first few years. I was, and then the next year I tried to get in again, and I didn't get in, and then I hated the O'Neill. Like, and I was bitter about it, and I was didn't want to go up there and visit, but yeah, that was the early transition into theater for me, was just actually going to the O'Neill and having a really positive experience.
And then you spent time at Juilliard?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I was so frustrated after the first few plays that they weren't getting produced because I was putting so much of my time and energy and my life and my hopes into them that I was like, well, it's not working, so I'm just gonna stay with the fiction. The fiction. My second book was getting published, and I thought, well, I can just focus on that. The theater, I'm failing, and I'm just gonna. I tried it, and I love it, but I think it's so frustrating, and I'm getting embittered, and so I'm gonna stop. And so I literally was telling my friends that. I was like, I'm not writing plays anymore. And then I got a call from Juilliard, and a woman who was in residence with me at the O'Neill named Kira Oblinsky, who's a really fantastic playwright. I guess she had given one of my plays to, she had been in the Juilliard program, and she had given one of my plays to Marcia Norman and Chris Durang, and they read it, and Marcia called me and asked me if I would come meet her and just talk to her, and I said sure, and I didn't know what it was about. So I went up to Lincoln Center, and if anyone knows, if you live in the East Village, going to Lincoln Center, it's like going to Connecticut. It's like, it takes so long, and I was a kind of slightly embittered, angry young playwright going to Lincoln Center, and she didn't show up because she had one of her kids got in trouble. And so the guy who was like the administrative assistant on the program, Joe Kramer, apologized, and he's like, she's really sorry, will you come back tomorrow? And I was like, no, I said, I don't think I want to do this. What is this anyway? And he was like, well, I think they want to offer you a spot in the program. And I said, well, I didn't even apply. And he was like, well, you should really consider it. It's a very prestigious program. And I was like, I was such a jerk. I was like, no, just give it to somebody else. She called me again the next day, and she's like, I can be there at 4 o'clock. Will you please meet me? And I was like, okay. I went up there. She didn't show up again. She had some other problem. She was coming in from Montauk or something. And so I was like, you know what? Forget this. But while I was up there, Joe Kramer, again, approached me. He was like, they want to give you a spot. We have one spot left. And he said, they give you money, not that much, but at the time it was a few grand for each semester. And it's free. And I was having a really hard time with my back. I had a really severe back problem for a long time, and from basketball injuries and stuff. And then he said, and I had no insurance, and he said, and we give you health insurance. And I was like, I'm coming. I was like, thank you. And so it was that cynical, actually. It was like, I'll come for the insurance. And then while I was there, I connected with all these actors who are sort of there to study Molière and Chekhov, and they're wearing corsets, and they're forced to do classics, and they're really, really hungry to do new work. They're really excited to meet the new playwrights coming in, and there were 3 of us. It was myself, Alexandra Cunningham, who I think ran one of the TV shows, ran Desperate Housewives for many years, and Deb Laufer, who's doing very well as a playwright now. We were the new crop, and so I connected with all these playwrights or actors, and kind of formed I didn't form a company, but I started working with the same guys and girls over the course of like 4 or 5 plays for those 2 years, and I completely fell in love with it again. And then from that time, I got one of my plays was done at ART in Boston, a play called Nocturne, and that sort of changed my life because it got national attention, and it was won some awards in Boston, and it was fancy awards and stuff. And then it came into New York, and it went to New York Theater Workshop, and then all the theaters that were sort of afraid to pull the trigger on me before that were now like willing to, because I had a success. And then some of the older plays, people don't really know this, but Nocturne was like my 12th play, and I was being presented to the world of theater like this new kid, and I was like 31, and they thought I was like 16 or something, and they were like, this new kid has written this great play in Boston, and everyone thought I was being interviewed, and they were like, so how is it to write your first play and have such a big hit? And I was like, it's my 13th play or my 12th play, and I've been miserable for 6 or 7 years, and so that was fun to go through that. But so then after that, things started getting better, career-wise.
I read that you also direct plays, and the reason you started directing plays is you got tired of directors messing up your plays.
Yeah.
And you it turns out you, as I understand it, Red Light Winter, when it was done at the garage at Steppenwolf, you directed it.
Yeah.
And you also say you're a control freak about lines, that the line readings have to be the words on the page.
Yeah.
So there's very much this control. You go from, and in theater in general, the playwright does have a great deal of control. You go from the land of the writer, now writer-director being king, and then you decide you want to make movies. What was why the transition to movies? First of all, why did you? Okay, I'm a successful playwright. Now movies.
Well, honestly, I was sort of always afraid of the West Coast, and I was afraid of the dark Hollywood world I kept hearing about, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I love film. I'm a total film freak. I love the films of the '70s. I love Bob Rafelson and Hal Ashby and all those great filmmakers. I love that whole wave of cinema and American cinema. But I was afraid that I would get corrupted by all the stuff I'd heard about, like the selfishness and the egomania and all that stuff. And so I was sort of avoiding it. And then when I was in Boston for my second play that ART did, this West Coast agent called me from UTA. His name is Julian Twan. He's still my agent to this day. And he said, I've read everything you've written, and I'm flying out to Boston. I'd love to sit down with you. And I was like, you haven't read everything I've written. And I was like very cynical. And he was like, no, I really have. And he really had. He had even found like plays that were buried under my laundry basket. He was, like, he was so thorough, and he came out and he was like, I think you could be a great filmmaker or a film writer, and you can make some money. And that was the first thing he sold me on, was like, you can make some money. So initially I was gonna try to sell a spec script, and I was just gonna write Winter Passing, which was my first film, was that I started talking to him about that idea. And he said, well, why don't you write it? And I think I could sell it because it has great characters, and your name right now is getting around the studios, and I think we could probably sell it as a spec script. And I got about page 50 into it, and I fell in love with it, and I was like, I love these characters. I could see what I want the film to be. I'd never held a camera. I'd never been on a crew. I'd never been a PA. But about page 85, he called me and he said, how are you feeling about this? And I was like, well, I think I want to direct it. And I was just starting to direct my own plays around that time. And he said, well, yeah, we could probably work that out. We could figure that out. And I was like, really? Because I don't know. I have no idea what the apparatus of filmmaking is. I said, but I know how to work with actors, and I know what I want. I think I have taste, and I have a vision of what I want, but I don't know the technical part of it. And he's like, well, your DP does that, and he said all this stuff, and I was like, well, let's just talk about it. So I met with this producer who was interested in the project, named Jennifer Dana, and she had worked on that movie Traffic, and with the producer, and they wanted to do the film, and so she started putting it together. And initially, honestly, it was like me meeting a bunch of actors, and a lot of you probably know that if you can generate talent that commands a certain kind of foreign value, then you can finance independent film. And so that's the route they took. So I met with Ed Harris, and based on my contacts through UTA and through Jen Dana's contacts, I was able to get these meetings with some pretty commanding actors. And so Ed Harris had done a play with my brother back in the 80s called Precious Sons on Broadway, and he played my brother's father. So he had already had a kind of relationship to my brother, of course, and even he knew my mother, and I'd met him when I was in military school and I was visiting New York on a spring break. He didn't remember me, but like there was something that piqued his interest about it, and he liked the role a lot. I went to Malibu and to his house, and we sat down, and we hit it off, totally hit it off, and he loved the script. And then like 2 days later, I met with Will Ferrell and Zooey Deschanel. I met a bunch of actors, but they wanted to do it, and so then we had our foreign value commanding money, and so they were able to offset the most of the budget by selling the foreign markets based on the cast. And so they were willing to risk on a first-time filmmaker with very little experience. And I also just went into the process like just demanding that I was going to be poised in front of people. Like when I would sit down with Green Street Films or Focus Films or some of these films that wanted to do it, I just was going to pretend like I knew what I was talking about. And which was helpful because I could talk about acting, I could talk about narrative, I could talk about films that I liked, how I wanted to move, how I wanted it to sound. I couldn't talk about coverage at that point. I couldn't talk about how you get your day in. I couldn't talk about all the things you learn making a film. But they believed in me enough, and I think I sold them a bill of goods. But and then I had to get bonded by the bonding company, which is interesting because you're sitting down and they're interviewing. You're like, so how do you think you're going to accomplish this if you've never made a film before? And again, I had to do that all over again, and I got bonded. So we did it, and I learned on the fly. And I had a great DP, Terry Stacy, who worked with a lot of first-time filmmakers, and we did a lot of prep and watched a lot of films and he took me through what coverage was, and we storyboarded and we talked about the kind of feel and the look and how he wanted to shoot it. We shot it on film, and how he wanted it to, what he liked about. We watched films like Morven Collar and a lot of 70s films, and that was kind of my film school. It was like that 5 months of just sitting with Terry Stacy and like talking about film and watching films, and he was showing me things that he liked. We would watch like 20 minutes of some film, and then he would talk about 15 minutes of this film, and so by day one, he and I had trusted each other enough that I could just work with the actors, and he could set up a shot, and then I could look at the monitor, and I could see if I liked it, and I started to feel like I knew what I was doing. And then about day 4, I actually did know what I was doing. It was a 28-day shoot, and it was like baptism by fire, and I'm glad I did it. I loved the process of it. I loved the whole experience of shooting. I loved editing. I loved working with the actors. I loved collaborating with all the key people. I absolutely hated the politics of distribution and the ass kissing and the stuff the hoops you have to jump through to get the film out, and to all the people you have to please. I didn't like that part of it. And we were talking before, I had our final cut on the film, but there was all these pressures from the higher-ups about, well, if you don't do this, then we might not want to open it at Sundance. There was like all this weird politicking and all this, it felt like the mafia a little bit, pressuring me to make certain choices about the cut. And I held strong to my position, and then I think I had a lesser release because of it, honestly. But I'm proud of it, and I'm glad I stuck to my guns, and it made getting the second one done harder. But yeah.
Yes?
Audience questions at some point. Sorry.
Yeah, well, how much time do we have?
You have about 10 more minutes.
Oh, well, that's okay.
10 minutes for audience.
10 minutes for audience. Do we have people in the audience that want to ask questions?
Okay.
Please go to the mic.
Yeah, there's been a two.
And you've also done television as well.
Yeah, I wrote for 2 seasons of The L Word as their honorary lesbian, And then I wrote one season of In Treatment. I wrote the final season they did. I wrote the Indian character, Sunil, for the actor Irfan Khan, who's an incredible actor.
So, my question is about your process. Because we have different writers talk today about, they work at an office or they work at home. So what is your process? And also, since you work on so different media, do you focus on, I'm working on a novel for X amount of time, or are you working on different projects at the same time, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I have an office at home. I'm lucky that I got a large apartment in the early 90s in New York, when you could still get a fairly sizable apartment in New York. And I turned one room into an office when I was able to afford to live there alone, which happened when I was about 35. So I've had an office, and that's where I work mostly. And I work directly onto a laptop. Which is more like composing music or something. The process is interesting. Right now I'm writing a novel, and I've been writing it since October, and that's all I've been focused on. And I'm also remounting an opera for Karen O at the Sydney Opera House, which we started at St. Anne's Warehouse. So part of my brain is occupied by that space, and then the majority of my brain right now is being occupied by this novel that I've been writing, that I'm about 500 pages into, that I'm absolutely obsessed with. What happens for me is I get very lonely writing fiction, and then I'll realize that I miss the theater, and so and I'll have this other play that's kind of picking at the back of my brain for a number of weeks, and I'll sometimes take notes about it, and then as soon as I feel free to pay attention to that, then I usually write the plays incredibly fast and very sloppily, and it takes me like months to figure out the big mess that I've created. So. And then I go into a rehearsal process if I'm lucky enough to have that play produced. And I start to work with actors, and I get into a social environment. So weirdly enough, the process, it's very yin and yang for me. Like the novel writing is relief from the theater, and the theater work is relief from the loneliness of writing fiction.
How do movies fit into that?
Well, I've done two, and the way movies fit into it is they happen if they happen. I'm doing one in the fall, and I have to get myself complete psychological and physical health for like a month before that, literally, and then so I can go out of my mind making the movie, and then become totally exhausted, so that I won't die, and then I'm able to be in the editing room and kind of. Spend time in the editing room and then work on something else as well, kind of use both part of my brains. But once the shooting starts, that's all I'm doing, and I'm just eating and sleeping and barely sleeping. And so the process is, for me, honestly, it's like it all sort of inspires each other in a weird way, and I've never had a problem, actually. I don't get blocked very much. I'm very lucky in that way. I have too many voices in my head, and I just have to be in a quiet room, and I can let it go. I think I was talking to Robbie, who's coming on after this. I think his film's coming last night. Like that feeling of he was talking about that feeling of free fall when the story is writing you. It's the best. It's like as good as lovemaking or riding a horse or swimming in the ocean or whatever. It's for me, it's like the most spiritually exciting reason to be alive for me, is when you're just a conduit and you're writing whatever's happening, So that's where I try to get to.
Actually, also a follow-up for me on that. In terms of your approach, are there's different kinds of writers. Are the ones that are the page count guys, right, or the word count? It's like every day I'm going to do 5 pages, X number of words, and when you hit the max, you walk away, come back tomorrow. And there are those that, they're kind of the Jack Kerouac, Benzedrine and gin nonstop. Mm-hmm. Where are you in that?
I write until I'm hungry. I do. I'll write, and then I'll write until my stomach starts going, okay, you got to eat, and then I'll stop, and then I can't really. I enjoy alcohol and drugs, and I'm pretty good about it because I'm an athlete, so I have to be careful about that. But I can't write on that. I can't write high. I can't. I know people who do and do very, very well, and they produce a large amount of work when they're high. I have to be absolutely clear when I'm writing, and the work for me is the high. You know, I like to go down the rabbit hole, and that's the rabbit hole for me. But I try to be pretty healthy, and I don't even do caffeine when I work. I just drink like vitamin water. It's boring, you know.
Wait, another one? I think you. Yep, it's you.
All right. Actually, I have two questions, but I'll definitely just ask the one for sure first. When you're coming up with an idea and characters and story, having written across so many different mediums with novels and plays and now films, do you ever visualize it as one of those mediums first?
Yes. Yeah. I always do. I've never started something and go, oh, I think this is a play, not a book. It's always, generally, if I can see the room and I can see people in the room and they want things from each other, and there's like a window and a door and I can sense something bad's going to happen, then I know it's a play. If I become obsessed with a character's voice in my head, like most of my novels, all of them actually are first-person narratives, so they're just monologue narratives in some ways, and I sometimes play with that form a little bit. But if I get haunted by a character's voice that I want to spend a lot of time with, then it's to me a longer form, and it's probably a novel.
Is there an equivalent for movies?
Yeah, it's similar to the theater thing. Like if I can see a cinematic, you know, I will say this. Like what I see with cinema is or film are shorter scenes and a lot more mood and like much less dialogue. With with theater, I want to get into the room as quickly as possible and keep them there as long as possible. And with film, I think you want to take your time and establish mood and get into this sort of the filmic narrative, the imagistic narrative in a way, and then like get in the room and then get out. And don't. What I learned in the editing room so much, which I think is so informative, is like I was writing these full scenes, full scene, full scene, full scene with a beginning, middle, and an end, and then you get in the editing room and you just take the middle, generally, because if you start completing scenes, then the energy of the filmmaking becomes like a finished scene, a finished scene, a finished scene. And I found that the work is more interesting and the tension stays higher if you don't finish those scenes, if you just sort of cut the ends off in some ways. So I'm trying to write more like that with film now that I know that. But
or if they had a question also. I'm sorry, I thought there was a second person.
No, they're just hovering in the wings over there. I think there may be somebody behind you, unless you have a follow-up.
I was just, I'm sorry, I was also going to quickly ask. I know you said before you had kind of an unfortunate experience with the distribution when you're passing. I was just wondering if you had any comments on some of the other forms of distribution that are going even now with filmmakers like Ed Burns doing stuff that goes to video on demand, or even recently, kind of an odd example on the other side, Kevin Smith with Red State. Just the ways, are you as a person who's doing films from a writing and directing standpoint, someone who's searching for those other avenues that way you feel like you can have, as I know you said, more control over that process and frankly not have to do as much ass kissing?
Yeah, I think there's some great things about on demand and streaming, things that are going to Netflix right away, or these simultaneous release things that are happening. I saw this French film called Police last week at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it was sent to me months ago because I might be working on a TV version of that story. It's an incredible, incredible film, and I watched it on my laptop, and it was a great story. I saw it projected at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it absolutely destroyed me. And there's something about the size and the scale of that same story happening like in this format that was really illuminating the story in a way that this format wasn't. So part of me as a purist wants those distribution things to equal the size and scale that as filmmakers that we set out to make our films to be projected, to have this mythological experience. I think when we see it on the computer, we're getting into this narrative now in our culture where we're in our room, we're in our dorm room, we're in the bathroom, we're in the kitchen and we can just flip up. We're on our smartphones watching films. And I think that's in some ways exciting because it gives more streaming and access and more funds back to us. Like there's a way to be paid in that way. But the art form, I think, suffers. So I don't know where I fall in the debate right now, because my first two films weren't like these things. You know, my last one came out in '06, and this wasn't a big issue then. But I'm making one in the fall, and I think it's something I have to really think about. You know, probably shoot it on digital because it's going to be seen mostly on a compressed screen. I don't know. We'll see.
Is it going to be Red Light Winter?
Yeah, yeah. The film of Red Light Winter, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question, not about your film work, but about your novels,
Uh-huh.
your young adult novels. I thought it was interesting that you said you had this brother growing up who at 14 was reading Don DeLillo and was very into advanced literature for his age. And you say about your own young adult novels that you think they're not really for kids. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess what I mean by that is that when I'm sitting down to write them, I'm not thinking about parents. I'm not thinking about material selections committees for high schools and
Yeah.
junior highs. I'm thinking about the character, and I'm thinking about the brutal world that the character's in, and so I don't censor myself. And so I think a lot of the marketing of that genre and a lot of the gatekeepers in that world are very concerned with permission slips, material selections, and so that to me like screams young adult literature. I'm not doing that. I'm actually just following this 14-year-old kid around who's trying to survive on the streets of Portland or wherever. It's just one of my books. I'm just whatever. I'm just interested in him, and I'm interested in him in as honest way as I can possibly be. And so I'm not worried about the whether it's going to offend anybody, or whether it's going to make a list, an appropriate list. You know, I think that's what I mean mostly when I say that I'm not worried about my audience in that way. I want kids to read them. Like there was no greater moment in my life when I read The Catcher in the Rye for the first time. Yeah. When I found that valence between me and a book that was so powerful, and I wanted to. I found you find a friend in a way that's like such a spiritual experience. You want to meet over and over and over again. That's what I want to give to anybody, but especially to kids who are just starting to read and discover characters. You know?
That's great. Thank you.
One to wrap up, one question I want to ask, and is we've got a room here of screenwriters, probably some playwrights from the theater school, probably some aspiring novelists as well. What advice would you give them?
Gosh. Well, the one thing I would say is like try really hard not to think about all the stuff you're going to get or not get. Just, I think, you have to become really diligent and committed to being able to sit in a chair for 8 or 9 hours, or 7 or 6 or 4 or whatever your body can take, and if you can develop that ritual and that faith, you will find your way through the forest in a way. I think worrying about money or worrying about how am I going to get there, or worrying about getting too far ahead of yourself with ambition is the killer of early careers, I think. And I feel like the lucky part that I had was I was so stupid in some ways to not care about any of that stuff. I just loved the romance that I had with trying to create worlds or a book, or I loved the process, and I think you have to fall in love with the process. So my biggest piece of advice, I guess, is create a process for yourself that protects you from those ambitions and those expectations, so that you can just be an artist. And all the other stuff will take care of itself. And read, that's the other thing. Like, so many people I know don't really care to read that much, and I think there's so much to learn from other writers. I just read David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest for the first time. It's like one of the greatest things I think I will ever read. It's just this incredible feast, you know, and you have to give a month of your life to it. But I feel smarter, and I feel like I've learned a little bit more about certain kinds of narrative experience because of reading that book. And I'm so glad I finally was open enough to, in my schedule and my life, to like sit down with it, because it's taught me a lot, you know. So reading and creating a process for yourself that's keeping you away from all the voices, ambition and expectation and stuff.
Well, I've been getting time cues that I think we're out of time, which means we didn't get a time to talk about the band. He's also in a band.
Oh.
We could say for next time. And I'd like to thank you for being here. And
yeah, thank you.